I was asked to prepare a couple of meditations for our community about confronting the trauma of this COVID pandemic and to perhaps bring some perspective about where we are at this particular time. Maybe even some helpful hints for moving into the future. In this, the first presentation of two, I outlined the human journey through trauma as I myself have experienced it. So welcome to what I'm calling my meditation corner here in our villa at Suncoast. I see all the residents laughing and enjoying the pandemic cartoons and jokes on display outside the library. That's good. Humor, laughter is an important step as we hike along what I call the trauma trail. Shared humor is even better. As we all know, when two or three are gathered together, life seems richer and the spirit rises. My family and friends call us asking if we are all right. They know we live in a community populated by the vulnerable elderly and feel obligated to remind me that experts tell us with a health center and assisted living facility, we have incubators for contagious diseases. My response has been to tell people that we are probably better off than they are. Let me tell you why. There are a variety of ways to graph, outline, and evaluate specific traumatic events. In this age of tracking watches and warnings, we have learned that summer hurricane pattern and that tornado pattern, we know what to expect. Now, every traumatic incident is different, each one having its own story, its own timeline, its own impact. This COVID-19 pandemic will have its own narratives. However, with any trauma, there does exist a common arc of events, as well as a common human experience of pain and despair. But also there exists the possibility, the human dream of creative activity and hope. Think about the trauma trail as a long hike. Unexpectedly thrown into this pandemic, suddenly we're at risk. Who can help us? Are we alone? Without accurate information, without a treatment protocol, without a vaccine, everything seems out of control, in chaos. Now, we are fortunate. While our relatives and friends may belong to a variety of communities, social, church, work, exercise, whatever, all these communities need time to get organized to respond. But we're already living in a community of staff, administration, residents, a community that actually lives together. And we have a commitment, a covenant, to care for each other. So our community was able to begin to act with compassion in order to protect the weakest among us. We're in the midst of hiking this trail, and in truth, further along the trail than most. As we move forward, we're already beginning to discern some clarity about the future. And eventually, we will discover the unfolding promise of new life. This is the pattern. Chaos, community, compassion, covenant, clarity, new life. This pattern is the trauma trail. To better illustrate this, I'm going to fall back on the best teaching method I know and the one used by Jesus and many others. I'm going to tell you a story. As you listen, be aware of those moments when you can identify the chaos or sense the community. Take note of moments of compassion and how covenants are created and implemented. Perhaps you may even identify some emotions aroused during the hike. Is there some clarity found? Does the story end with new life? You listen and you decide. Now, this is a story about a trauma we have all experienced, moving from one place to another. I'm going to tell you about my parents' experience when they moved out of a manse into what our family called our summer camp. Now, I never thought of my parents as romantic, but who does? Then my father retired, and my parents moved into that house in Maine with its 3 porches. Located on a tidal creek, the old 2-story white house had 6 bedrooms, one bathroom, an outside shower, wooden floors, no central heat, a pile of beach chairs and blankets and beach toys, and a multitude of floating items from rubber rafts to an old rowboat to a small sailboat. It had been a perfect retreat for spending long summer days. Minimal maintenance and a regular yearly painting schedule kept the old house habitable and secure. However, with Dad's retirement in view, that house had to be more than simply summer habitable. My parents planned to live in it year-round. Many planning discussions were held, but little preparation actually followed. Then Dad's retirement parties took place, and in the late summer, moving day arrived. My father and I rented a U-Haul truck, packed everything into it. We drove back up to Maine, and I unloaded it all into the old house. And then, leaving my parents surrounded by furniture, boxes, and good intentions, I left to go back to New York to the church where I was the pastor. By the next summer, when my family arrived for vacation, Mom and Dad had turned that summer camp into a comfortable home. One night at dinner, I asked them how they'd managed this transformation. "It was the 3 porches," my dad replied. "What?" "Your mother's idea. She managed the whole thing." Putting down her fork, my mother took up the tale. "Well, after you got the truck unpacked and all the furniture and boxes inside the house, you left. Now, we appreciated your help, and we knew your time was limited. But we were not really prepared to face all that stuff alone. It did not take us long to realize that we were in a real mess. After all, the house was already completely furnished, and when we began to move all that up into the attic, we were reminded that the attic was already full of the chairs and beds and tables that had preceded the summer furniture, as well as all your grandparents' stuff we had never sorted through." Dad added, "Not to mention the stuff we stored up there over the years just to get it out of sight." "That's right, dear. Frankly, we were completely overwhelmed. And tired. Yes, worn out. So we left everything where it was and went to bed." Dad joked, "It didn't look any better in the morning." My mother, ignoring my father, resolutely plowed on. "We spent that first day moving boxes around the house from one place to another and then back again. Same with the chairs." By day's end, we hadn't even opened one box, and on top of that, we were just plain old crotchety with one another. Smiling at each other, they seemed to get lost in a shared memory of that moment. So I prompted them, "What did you do then?" Dad replied, "We went out to dinner. All we had in the house was some bread and stuff for breakfast and some peanut butter. We hadn't been to the grocery store to do any shopping. And we hadn't even really unpacked any of those boxes," Mom added. "And after we came back to the house, we just sat and stared at that mess." "Then we went to bed," Dad added. "I fell asleep, but she didn't." "No, I lay there thinking about the last couple days, and I decided we needed to try something different. So the next morning, I got up before your father, went down and made some coffee and toast. When Dad came down, I told him we were going to eat out on the front porch." "Yep, we sat out on the porch swing and ate and watched the squirrels in the maple tree across the street. After a bit, your mother told me she had a proposition, so she propositioned me again." Mother smiled at their old shared joke. She often complained she could never get Dad to agree to anything unless she propositioned him. "Yes, I suggested that we go to the store, get some TV dinners, other necessities. Then we'd stop and buy some lobster rolls for lunch. When we got back to the house, we would clear out the front room so we could have a place to sit. And then we'd take our lobster rolls out on the back deck and eat them there." "That's what we did," Dad said. "Though at lunch your mother started with phase 2 of her plan. Now, it wasn't that I had everything all thought out. I just had a feeling that if we had meals at the house, something would happen. I simply suggested that we start by getting things that were important to us in place. For Dad, getting his books and papers as organized as he could, and for me, getting that kitchen in some working order. Mother paused to breathe, and Dad jumped in. We'd decided that my study would be upstairs in the bedroom, next to the one we use. So we went up to take a look at the situation. Of course, being a bedroom, it had a bed in it. So we took that bed down and put it in one of those bedrooms you and your brother and your families fill when you come to visit. We decided to use those 3 bedrooms as a temporary holding area. Mother's turn. I also said we would not come upstairs without carrying something with us. I was thinking of all of Dad's books. When we went back downstairs, we opened one of those book boxes so we could begin to carry a few up every time that we did go upstairs. Dad went to work on his study, and I worked downstairs in the kitchen. My father laughed. That had an extra benefit. We weren't under each other's feet. Mother, smiling, continued. We worked for a couple hours and took a little break for a snack and then spent a couple more hours. And finally, I prepared some TV dinners and suggested we eat out on the little back porch, where we could see Dad's flower garden and catch a glimpse of the creek as well. Dad smiled. We just sat down and said grace and ate our meal. Then we compared notes and we made some plans for the next day. Your mother insisted it start with breakfast out on the front porch. Mother picked up the narrative. With breakfast on the front porch, it seemed more like home to have lunch on the deck and dinner on the back porch. Dad spoke. We continued with that until it got too cold, but as soon as it warmed back up, we started doing it again. Thoughtfully, he continued, those 3 porches and those times together doing nothing but being together reminded us of how much we had been through. Mom added, and gave us a chance to look ahead to all the things we wanted to do. My father was still thoughtful. On those cool fall days in the morning, we might wear mittens, same at lunch. Then with a twinkle in his eye and looking at his wife, he went on. But in the evening on the back porch, we would take a blanket with us and we'd snuggle. When we're home alone, we still do. My mother blushed. I couldn't speak. Their love actually said it all. Well, that's the story. Did you notice the progression of the arc of trauma as my parents hiked that trauma trail? The years had established an expectation about that house on the creek. It was a summer retreat. But now that belief was shattered. The house was not to be a hideaway but a home. That was the dream. But the reality snuck up on them. When they moved, it was into a chaotic mess of boxes and furniture, into chaos. How did this happen? What will we do with all these chairs? These boxes? Where do we begin? They spent a day becoming more frustrated and grew angry at each other. Then they went out to dinner and came back to find that nothing had changed while they were out. No miracles had occurred, so they went to bed. But my mother had an inspiration. They needed to eat breakfast together, somewhere familiar. The swing on the front porch. So they did. Coffee, toast, watching squirrels, an old joke, a bit of humor, a proposition, a plan. They'd formed a community. 2 or 3 gathered together. Where that happens, the Spirit will work. They made an agreement, a covenant together, a small one, to buy food and have meals in their house. Lunch shared in another sacred space, out on the back deck, where 2 or 3 could be together in peace, just a small step. During lunch, a compassionate question, what do you need? Dad needed to study. Mom needed a kitchen. Just a little bit of clarity began to develop, so they went to work. Evening meal was shared in a small space where 2 or 3 could gather, the back porch. Another agreement was made to share meals in the house and have a rhythm of sacred spaces. Breakfast on the front porch, lunch on the deck, supper on the back porch. Finally, did you hear the clarity that came to guide them? The furniture of boxes, having everything in place, were good steps, but what really mattered, and this became clear, was the relationship created over the years, the past, the present, and yes, hope for the future, the new life to come. Chaos, community, compassion, covenant, clarity, new life. This journey, this hike of changed life, this trail we walk is now our future. Along that walk, there were emotions and negotiations in the story. Did you see them? There was anger, helplessness, frustration, but also laughter, understanding, respect, and love. A hike on this trail brings out the full range of emotion. But rather than let that take control, my parents' choice was to recognize emotion and use it as a spur to negotiation. Right now in this pandemic, many are still in chaos, struggling to survive. However, in moving to Suncoast, we all chose to be part of a community. And when the chaos hit, we did not have to search out a community to join, to begin to take creative action. After the initial shock and confusion, the anxiety and fear, we administration, staff, residents began to take that compassionate action in order to protect the health of the most vulnerable elderly among us. It was not easy, it never is, but together we moved forward. Masks have been made, schedules are being rebuilt in different ways. We have been pushed learning new ways to communicate and to make better use of the technologies available to us. Most important of all, and to our spirits, we've expressed our gratitude to one another in a variety of ways. When thanks are given, we know that God's Spirit is working within us. As together we hike along this trauma trail, we've not yet achieved clarity about what is to come. There are still lots of bumps, stones, and pitfalls in the road ahead. What we do know is that we are moving into this new life together. Now until our next session, I leave you with a pandemic blessing. When you meet a person with a mask, may you see the eyes of God's beloved child. When you wash your hands, may you see the hands of God's beloved servant. And when you maintain that 6 feet of separation, may you bridge that space with a mutual blessing, one both given and received, wishing good health to the one you meet upon the trail.